All right, it is time for a coffee chat, and today we're going to be talking about whether or not I think we're going to war and what we should be doing about it. Let's jump right in. But first, coffee. Hello, if you're new here, my name is Brecky, and this is Sustainable Prepping, where we empower through preparedness, and we are jumping into a conversation I've been wanting to have for a while, and that is, should we be preparing for war? If we're preparing for war, what are some things we should think about? And what do we really need to be spending our energy on? So grab yourself a hot beverage, get yourself your favorite mug. I have one of my new faves right here, and let's dive right in. All right, so we are talking about war, and one of the things that people have been asking in some of the prepping communities I'm a part of, people have DM'd me on Instagram, is how much should we be thinking about war if we are beginning to get into preparedness? My goal is to empower brand new preppers and to encourage those who've already begun their preparedness journey on being prepared for realistic events. And for the most part, war has not been a realistic event for the United States in a long time. But things are changing. There have been some comments by the head commander of NATO, for example, that people should have 3 days of water and food and flashlights. 3 days clearly is not enough. We know that, but the encouragement to have food and preps in place. Scandinavian countries have encouraged their citizens to have preparedness in place. Particularly Sweden has, over the last several years, been reminding their citizens to be prepared for emergencies. This predates the Russian invasion of Ukraine, I would like to remind folks. And of course, we have seen the hint of possible conscription for the UK and other encouragement for citizens of the United Kingdom to be preparing for potential conflict. So what does that mean for all of us? We're looking at the news. This is being filmed in the very beginning of February 2024. We're seeing a possible expansion of conflict in the Middle East, possible expansion of Russia's front to invade Ukraine and possible other territories. And of course, the looming possible threat of China. Should we be preparing for war? And if so, what should we be doing? Now, I want to start with saying I am not a foreign policy expert. I am not a diplomacy expert. I do not work for the State Department. I have not been a part of the United Nations. My work was always non-governmental. I have done international relief work in Asia and in Israel-Palestine. So I do have some familiarity with how international NGOs work, but I have not ever worked for a government, so I want to put that out there. I am not a foreign policy analyst, and I do not play one on TV, so I just want to have that out there as we dissect my thoughts on war. Now, the first thing I want to say is I don't think we're on the brink of war, and I think that if the current administration in the United States, which is currently the Biden administration, wanted us to go to war, we already would have. For example, we have service members who recently died because of attacks in Iran from non-state actors, and if the United States wanted a justification to launch a war in the Middle East, that would be more than enough justification. Any of the Houthi strikes on American service ships would be more than enough justification. After the Russian invasion of Ukraine, there was a bomb that kind of went sideways and ended up detonating in Poland. Now, this was actually friendly fire. It was a mistake that was claimed and cleared up by NATO. But if they had really wanted to go to war, it would have been an easy way to justify. They could have covered up that it came from friendly fire, absolutely used it to justify attacking Russia, and we would be in war already. So it is my perspective, based on these and other incidents, that if the United States and NATO wanted war, they actively wanted war, they were given many opportunities to be retaliatory and to escalate. Right now, the policy has been to de-escalate. As long as our policy is a de-escalation policy and not an escalation policy, I don't think we're going to be actively going to war anytime soon. The NATO commander who made the comments also made the comments that it would be over the next 20 years we should be planning that we will not necessarily be at peace, particularly in Europe. So he's not saying tomorrow. He is giving a long runway, but he's reminding people they need to be prepared. And I think that's a different conversation, which I want to come back to. Because we have an administration right now that isn't itching to go to war, and we have a NATO leadership that isn't itching to go to war, again, if they wanted to, we would already be in conflict. That helps me have some confidence that we are not on the brink of war tomorrow. Now, I could be wrong, of course. Like I said, I'm not a foreign policy analyst, but this gives me a little bit of hope that calmer minds are trying to prevail. Now, it takes two to tango. You can be a calm mind, and there's only so far that you can de-escalate if the other side is hell-bent on escalation. However, all this helps me have confidence that at least from an administrative position at this point in early 2024, there is not a desire to jump into a needless conflict if they can be avoided. But what if it can't be avoided? What if there are escalations with non-state actors that spread across the Middle East and continue to attack American installations that draws in state actors? What if there is an escalation with Russia as they understand that they're not going to be able to take the territory of Ukraine that they want? They decide to escalate on other fronts to try to gain some territory in order basically to self-soothe. Basically, their ego is shot, their economy is in the toilet, their allies are only sort of allying them, and they need something to be able to justify the incredible loss of life. What if they escalate? Here are my thoughts. One, I don't think that's going to happen, and if it happens, I think it is going to be seen from a mile away. Putin is becoming more erratic, and I think that his hold on the country is slipping. I think it's much more likely that Russia will devolve into some kind of internal civil conflict before we see a major escalation to other foreign powers. I think right now he has to try to save face, and he's going to look at ways to do that where he can be successful. In a war with NATO, Russia can't be successful. They don't have the manpower to be successful at this point. So even if he decides to go nuclear, I mean, there is no successful. No one wins a nuclear war, right? This is the whole point of everybody having arms, right? This arms race and everybody having nuclear power. Nobody wins. There is no winning, right? There's just first strikes, but first strikes is not winning. So there is no winning a nuclear war, and Putin knows that. The real fear with nuclear armament, y'all, is not governments. It's non-governmental actors who don't have the kind of restraint or knowledge of foreign power and diplomacy that governments do. I'm not afraid of governments that have nuclear weapons. I'm afraid of a non-state actor getting a nuclear weapon. That's the real danger, because they're not held to the same, they're not a part of the same conversations. They don't understand that nuclear threat is all that you really need. You don't actually want to use nuclear weapons. They are truly like not just a last resort, they are everything's already done resort. Right? So my fear is not that Putin has nukes. My fear is if Putin is taken out of power and Russia has a vacuum and things happen where it's split up and a bunch of non-state actors do a power grab, who is going to be in control of those missiles? And if it's not the government, what non-state actors may have access to nuclear weapons that don't have the same code of ethics, they don't understand foreign policy, but don't understand the consequences the way that anyone that at that level of government would understand. So that's my personal fear around nuclear weapons. I want to address China as well. I don't think that they are a threat for war right now. One, Chinese economy is not doing great. It's really struggling. And don't let anybody fool you. If you look at the actual raw numbers, they've only had a GDP of like 5%, which is barely growing. Now, you may see people take really, really narrow slices of life and say they've had a 38% increase, but that 38% increase might be over like a couple of weeks, not over a whole year. So their GDP is very low right now. They're having very low expansion. They are having a lot of problems where they're having to review everything in their military because of corruption. If you looked at anything around them using rocket fuel for like camp stoves because of corruption, the missile silos that aren't working because of corruption. So they're not in a place right now to be an aggressor. Any kind of conflict that China is going to engage in will be a soft power conflict, not a hard power conflict. War is a hard power. War is an aggressive way of showing dominance. Soft power is going to be tariffs. Soft power is going to be slowing or stopping exporting. Soft power is going to be manipulating smaller countries that are maybe regional players but not world players into siding with China against the West, globally, US in particular. And this is going to be in places like Africa, where China is investing a lot of money, but also South America. So I don't see them engaging in an all-out arms war, but a trade war, possibly, soft power war in what used to be called the third world, right? The non-global power structures. Yeah, absolutely. I see that. Now that might cause inflation, that might cause loss of access to material goods, but not an armed conflict. So I don't think we're going to be going to war with Russia anytime soon unless we see a regime change or Putin just gets really, really erratic, which I think would then lead to a regime change, to be honest. I don't foresee China being an arms threat at this point. Again, they have to get their own house in order, and they are in the process of reviewing their own military corruption and spending, and they seem much more interested in using soft power than hard power. The only real catalyst right now is the Middle East, and part of that is because, again, non-state actors, right, non-governments that have access to lots of arms are militant and radicalized. They are seeing that their governmental counterparts are not following through on promises. There's a great video from Beau of the Fifth Column about Iran and non-state actors, and I'm going to leave it in the description because he is going to explain this way better than me. But they're where I think we may have a escalation because these non-state actors don't understand foreign policy. If that does escalate and we end up having some kind of armed conflict in which the United States, which is where I'm at, has boots on the ground, what should we prepare for? Well, if it is a conflict like we had in Iraq, you should just be prepared for losing people that you love that are in the military, but no other major changes to our economy, to our access to goods and services. Perhaps some slowdown if the Houthis continue to be aggressive around the Red Sea, some slowdown of what's available coming through those ports, but not a cessation of those things, perhaps an increase in price while there's a decrease in availability, but not a cessation, not rationing, and really not a lot of change for most of us in our day-to-day lives. Again, some things being more expensive and less available, but not massive, massive disruption. If we were going to see massive, massive disruption, a major world war, it would have to be larger than what's happening in the Middle East. It would have to be a larger conflict, either a full regional conflict that spreads across the Middle East and into North Africa, or it would mean Russia choosing to go to war, probably with NATO, or launch some kind of attack on the United States. Those things I think are really, really unlikely. But just to do the thought experiment while we're having a coffee chat, what would I do? Well, first, I would drink some coffee. Then I would make a list. And that list would be inventorying what I have and what comes from the regions that are impacted. Now I want to do a whole separate video where we talk about rationing like we had in the Second World War and what that would look like nowadays. But if for some reason we had boots on the ground conflict in the Middle East or in Russia, but if we ended up having boots on the ground conflict in the Middle East or in Europe, here is what I would do to prepare. The first thing that I would do is really to look at what I have gaps in. It would be all about inventorying. That would be my first priority. What do I actually have and what do I not have that could become important? The second piece would be looking at fuel. Fuel sources are likely to be something that becomes rationed and could lose availability. Yes, we can produce more oil, all of that stuff, but oil futures are a global market, and so it is challenging. I'm not just talking about gas and oil though. I'm talking about things like natural gas and the things you use to heat your home. I would want to make sure I had all of those things, backup options, solar options, other generator options, if our utilities became either rationed or unavailable because of lack of parts, right? Because of cascading issues, we have a natural disaster that we can't respond to as well because we're in a conflict, that kind of a thing. So I'd want to do an inventory of like my general goods in my home. I'd want to do a definite fuel inventory to make sure I had everything possible. And then the next thing would be putting myself on a really, really good budget so I could save up as much as possible going into the conflict. It doesn't sound sexy as putting in a garden or anything like that, which I would do, and I have a small garden anyway, but I would want to have as much cash on hand for when inflation goes up to make sure I have that padding. Financial preparedness is a form of preparedness, and while we think of the stuff of preparedness, in fact, a lot of us will go a long way if we have financial resources available. So if I knew we were going to be heading into something major, if I had an inkling that a rationing system was going to be taking place, I would want to save as much as I could in advance, after purchasing what I could purchase while it's available, to then have as much savings so that when things are more expensive, there was a little bit more padding in the bank accounts to afford those more expensive items. But at the end of the day, as of February 2024, I really don't see us jumping into a world war. Now, could we end up being pulled into some small regional conflicts? Might we have to do some very savvy foreign policying? Yes, I do. But I do think we have an administration at the moment that is committed to not pulling us into regional conflicts. If they wanted to, there have been many opportunities over the last 5 years, so even into the last administration, where we could have had a conflict, right? There were occasions pre the Russian invasion of Ukraine that could have allowed the United States and NATO to act, and they chose not to. Now, my point is not to say Biden is awesome or that NATO is fabulous. That's not the point. The point is simply that right now, the leaders of the United States and of NATO and most of Europe aren't itching for war. If they wanted a war, we would have already had a war. So they are trying the avenue of de-escalation. How long can that last? We'll find out. But right at this moment, I'm not worried about a world war. Regional conflicts, possibly, but not a full-scale World War III. Not the thing at the top of my list to worry about. What I would suggest you worry about is lack of access to things that are coming from abroad, simply because I think we'll continue to see targeting of the tanker ships across the Red Sea. I think that we will continue to see China exercising soft power by potentially slowing down or raising the prices and costs of items made in China, and even some tensions around Taiwan that get translated into soft power uses by China. But I don't think you're going to see boots on the ground. That's my inclination. Again, not a foreign policy expert. I'm going to be planning by prepping like I would for anything, prepping like I would for any day, any disaster of the week, because your foundations and prepping are going to serve you in peacetime or conflict. Friends, comment down below and let me know, how close do you think we are to a major war? Not a regional conflict, not a scalpel, send SEAL Team 6 in to take out the bad guys. I'm talking about another Iraq war invasion or even a full-scale world war. How close do you think we really are? And what are you doing to manage those thoughts and how you're preparing for that eventuality? I'd like to know what you're doing, and I will be following up with more conversations on this in another future coffee chat. If you liked this coffee chat and you want to learn more how you can build a foundation that will prepare you for peacetime or conflict, check out this video right here on Lighting 101. It's a part of my Prepping 101 series, and it's going to help you lay a great foundation of preparedness that will serve you no matter what the conflict or disaster. All right, friends, I hope you're all doing super well, and until the next video, happy prepping.